Good evening, everyone. My name is Joy Chen. I'm with the Eaton Fire Survivors Network. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for what I know will be a very exciting discussion about mortgage forbearance. I know that when we hear the word mortgage, we love hearing the word forbearance after that, and also housing contractor scams. We have a panel of the nation's most trusted consumer advocates, lawyers here with us tonight. So we have two organizations here, the National Housing Law Project and Public Counsel. We'll start off with a couple of presentations just to give us a high-level overview of what we need to know as fire survivors around the whole area of mortgages, and then the whole area of housing scams and specifically scams around financing. We'll start off with two brief presentations, and then we'll move directly into a moderated discussion. Let's start off with Lisa Sitkin of the National Housing Law Project. Lisa?
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to get to share some information and hear your questions and a little bit about what you guys are facing as you navigate this really difficult time. So I have a few slides. It's very loose. We're going to go pretty quickly into questions and answers, but I did want to just ground us all in a few sort of key things related to mortgages. And I'm going to talk about specifically about forbearance plans and the availability of forbearances, and also about some of the interaction between your ability to basically get your insurance payout and what goes on with your mortgage servicer, because they have a role in it, which is very surprising when we first discover that the mortgage servicer actually gets to have a say, because it's not a great thing. Anyway, do I have share privileges on here? I think I do.
Hope so.
Yeah.
You should do.
Okay. All right. So I'm not even going to put it in the presentation mode, just because then it's harder for me to see what's going on the screen, but hopefully you can all see the basic slides. So as I said, we're going to look at mortgage forbearance and then the servicer's role in getting those insurance claim payments to you so that you can use them in the way you choose. So the first really important thing to know is that your ability to get forbearance, and I should define, just so we're all on the same page, mortgage forbearance simply means an agreement between you and the mortgage servicer, the one who collects your monthly mortgage payments, an agreement that for some period of time, you won't have to make your mortgage payments. In some cases, forbearances provide for just a reduced payment, or sometimes, I know I saw during COVID, sometimes people would just pay the escrow part of their mortgage and not the principal and interest. So it can look different ways, but by and large, we're usually talking about an agreement which allows you to just pause payments for some period of time and have some breathing room to be able to put things back together and kind of get back on track. What your rights are to having a forbearance from your mortgage servicer will depend almost entirely on what kind of loan you have. So, and we will be sharing these slides through Joyce, I guess, afterwards. But this first slide is just to give you some information about how you can find out what kind of loan you have and the main categories that matter for these purposes. And, you know, if people have questions, I mean, folks on the ground there, Steph's organization, you know, can also help with this kind of thing. But you do really want to start by knowing Do I have an FHA loan? Do I have a VA loan? You may already know this. Do I have a loan that's been purchased by Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae? They're these kind of quasi-government agencies. Or do I have a loan that's in the private market? It's owned by a securitized trust or by the bank itself or something. And that matters because there are different rules for forbearances depending on which category your loan is in. So for an FHA loan, generally, you are going to have the opportunity to get up to 12 months of forbearance after this is specifically in a disaster context, but usually you will be asked to sort of check in periodically during that period of time. So really what you'll be given is usually a 90-day, and then you have to kind of check in and get it renewed, a couple more times. An important thing to just be aware of is after the forbearance ends, you're going to obviously need to get current again. And a forbearance does not mean that those payments get forgiven or that you don't owe that money. It's just sort of a reprieve for those months. So there's going to be this arrears that has built up if you had a 90-day or a 6-month forbearance or more that has to be dealt with. You may, out of insurance proceeds or other sources or savings, be able to simply reinstate at that point when things are more stable for you. But many people obviously are not going to be able to do that. So we want to just give a little info here, and we can talk about it more if people have questions, that if you have an FHA loan, generally the options that will come to you after a forbearance are going to be something called a partial claim, which just means they take the amount you owe and then put it at the back of the loan. You don't pay interest, but you'll have to pay it eventually. Or you can combine that or just have a standalone modification that actually changes the terms of your loan. And for FHA loans, because of high interest rates right now, those aren't great propositions because they can end up costing you more. So I don't want to get too deep in that, but it's just important to be looking ahead and knowing that if you're on a forbearance, there's a whole other step that you're going to have to engage with the servicer to get the loan brought current again. For Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, again, generally up to 12 months, usually in 90-day increments. And they have a different names for what comes after, but they work similarly. Disaster payment deferral, where they put the money at the end of the loan, or what's called a flex mod. And for many people who have Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac loans, you don't have to give up your current lower interest rate and take today's market rate when you change. So having a Fannie or Freddie loan in this context can be a good thing. And, you want to know what you're dealing with. Okay, and then for VA loans, it's a little squishier. They don't give a lot of direction, but generally people get the same kind of help, at least 6 months, I think. I mean, it could be up to 12, but again, it's going to be in smaller increments. For private loans, unfortunately, we don't have the rules. The rules vary from investor to investor. But several servicers have committed to the governor of California to offer 90-day forbearances and some additional protections. There is a list of those servicers at this link, which will be shared with you. But you should keep in mind that even if your servicer is on that list, there can be cases where the investor of the loan has said in the contract with the servicer, you can't do forbearances. So there are some where even if they're on that list, it's not 100% guaranteed that forbearance will be offered. Please be sure to report. I know you have so many things you're dealing with, so I just ask this knowing that you may not be able to, but if you can, it's great if you can report forbearance denials to the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation in California, because they can track and push back, and we can we keep in touch with them too, and we can try to, put some pressure on to get that roadblock loosened up. Okay, finally, and I know we'll have lots of questions about this. With respect to insurance proceeds in your mortgage servicer, the servicer or the lender is generally required to be named as an insured party on your homeowner's policy. So that means, because of that, the checks that get written by the insurer when they pay anything out will be made out to you and to the servicer, meaning they have control and sort of veto power in some sense over how that money gets, how and when that money actually gets to you or gets to be able to pay a contractor. So that can cause a lot of complications, and I'm sure many of you are already running into these. I should say, we're talking about the insurance proceeds specifically for rebuild or repair. You will have other insurance payouts due to you or coming to you that are for living expenses, for personal property. Those should be coming to you. Those are not things that the mortgage servicer should be involved in. And that may be something you need to push back on your insurance company if you're seeing that that money is somehow going to the mortgage servicer first. What you will need to look at, and if you're sort of assessing what are my rights here, again, as with the forbearance, you need to know what kind of loan you have, because the rules that apply to what mortgage servicers have to do or can do or should do depend a lot on what kind of loan. Is it an FHA loan? Is it a VA loan? And then there are a number of other things that are going to determine kind of how much control, let's say, you have over those funds. Were you current on the mortgage going into the disaster? How much money is going to be available for the repair and or rebuild? What is the unpaid principal balance? What is the property worth? What do you want to do with the property? Can the property legally be rebuilt? And do you have a viable plan for rebuilding the property? So I'm going to not try to, answer or explain exactly how these play out, because we'll probably get into some of that in the questions. But these are kind of the factors that matter. It's not going to be just a one-size-fits-all answer whether your particular servicer has to send you or your contractor X amount of money on X date. These things are going to, come into play to kind of determine what the rules of the road are. I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was a really great overview about mortgages. Now let's hear from Steph about the scams that may befall us.
Oh, there will be lots of scammers out there. Okay. Can you see the slideshow? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Hello, folks. I am Steph Carroll at Public Counsel. We are an LA-based legal services organization. I got to know Lisa Sitkin and Stacey Tutt from National Housing Law Project very well because we all ended up becoming experts in something called PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy, which is a particularly insidious home improvement financing scheme that has something to do with the government. Okay. All right, let me move it on. Okay, so I think the first thing I want to say to people is we know that there's already a big shortage of contractors in LA County. We know that there's going to be lots of contractors moving in to, do some of the rebuilding. And it's very, very difficult. The situation everyone's in, very, very difficult because everybody's chasing the good contractors. But what I would say is just be very aware of being solicited or people telling you what you need. Whilst there may be things that you don't know about what you need, you should be the one going out to try and find contractors and talk to them. And that I know is a difficult thing, but I think that the very best way of doing that is really, you know, through your community, through your contacts. And I know from speaking to Labid a bit earlier that, you know, one of the things he's involved in is trying to kind of vet contractors. And I think the more you can as a community come together to do that, the better. One of the things that you will almost certainly hear is that there are free government programs to help you. You may be told that you won't have to pay anything. If somebody says you won't have to pay anything, I would generally run as far in the other direction as possible. It may be that there are some free programs around. Take the information from them, say thank you very much, and go away and do your own research and really look up. If somebody says it's a free government program, ask them, what government are you talking about? Are you talking about LA County? Are you talking about the state? Are you talking about the federal government? And what's the name of the program? And go away and do independent research on that. We had hundreds and hundreds of victims of this scheme that I spoke about before called PACE. Which was billed as a free government program. It wasn't. You ended up paying massive tax liens through your property taxes. The next thing we hear is that tax credit will cover financing. Every now and again, tax credits can be helpful, but all too often we see this kind of misrepresentation bandied around by home improvement contractors who have no idea what they're actually talking about. And so you can ask for some specific details and again, try and look into that yourself. I would say one of the biggest red flags ever is if a contractor offers you a mobile device, be that a cell phone or an iPad, for you to sign, do not touch that device. If it's not that you can never sign things using a mobile device, you can. But contractors often say, please just check here because we need to check your credit, or we need to check that you're eligible for this free government program that doesn't exist. And what you end up doing is signing up for financing that you have no idea you're signing up for. You should always be asking to see a written contract and to look through that separately. And then if it comes to you deciding to enter into a contract, you can sign it electronically as long as you've been through the whole contract in full in writing. Any contractor who asks for more than 10% as a down payment or $1,000, whichever is less. Now that is the law. I will say, I have yet to meet a contractor who has not abrogated this. When I point it out to them, they are often quick to say, oh, yes, of course. But I will say that, you know, just you should know that that is the law, that they cannot ask for more than that, and that you can report them to the Contractor State Licensing Board if they do. So always be ready to remind them of that. Anyone who insists on a need to hurry. Now, I understand that for a lot of people, especially the people who still have homes that are standing but are not habitable, that there is a real impetus to move quickly. That's your impetus. Do not fall for the impetus of some contractor who tells you that you have to sign by 6 o'clock or you will not get this incredible deal. Or, you know, this free government program will go away at midnight. I would just suggest you never, ever, you know, you take all of that kind of thing with an absolute pinch of salt. People who don't provide you a written copy of the contract to read that they're expecting you to sign for whatever reason. If they want you to really engage in this contract, they should be able to provide you with a written copy. I would be careful about if there's any lack of clarity about who is paying for the work. And for most of you, you're going to have this added layer of your mortgage company potentially being involved in the contracting process. For some of you, that might actually be a good thing because the mortgage company might, you know, have to say that something is okay to do. But it's always really, really important to know, because I am sure I am going to see people coming into our unit who should have had things paid through by insurance, but have ended up getting some really expensive financing that they then have difficulty getting out of. If contracts are negotiated in any language other than English, but you're only getting written documents in English, again, I would suggest running in the other direction. So how to protect yourself in general. Always take your time. Ask to see work done by the contractor and talk to homeowners who've actually used them. There will be, whilst lots of properties in the area I know have been destroyed, though, you know, an established contractor is going to have worked on properties, you know, all around the general area of Pasadena, Glendale, etc., etc. Try and see work that they've done and speak to homeowners in person who can show you the work and talk to you about the contractor. Always make sure they have a contractor state licensing board license, that they're bonded, and I would always ask them to make sure that they carry workers' compensation insurance, because you don't want to be on the end of a workers' compensation claim if they don't have it. And I would ask, are they going to be using subcontractors, and get the names and contact details. Now, your general contractor might not know the names of all the subcontractors they're going to use at the very beginning, but as they subcontract with those folks, they do know, and you need to have those people's details, because one of the things you're going to need to do when you make payments to the contractor is make sure that the contractor is paying the subcontractors, because if not, the subcontractors can come back and make claims against you. Always ask for contracts in writing and read them carefully. You will always have a right to cancel. It is generally 3 days or 5 days if you're over 65. In a disaster, it is generally 7 days for a home improvement contract. I don't know that that applies to the financing contract. It probably does, but I would have to look into that, and I don't know if Lisa or Stacey can speak to it later. Make sure the home improvement contract specifies all the work that needs to be done. Now, it's not going to specify it down to each screw that's going to be used, but if you are having, you know, a certain type of windows, you're going to have those type of windows. If you're rebuilding the house and the garage, it needs to specify both properties and what they're going to be made up of. Agree to pay only on completion of sections of the work. And again, you might need the mortgage services involvement in those payment schedules. And always get receipts for all payments, and make sure you get proof that the subcontractors have been paid. In terms of the home improvement financing contracts, and this is really what we deal with, this is the predatory lending that we see. Understand the type of financing. So I've mentioned this word PACE. We haven't seen many PACE loans recently, but I think they're going to be making a comeback with the rebuilding. If you see anything that has the words property assessed clean energy, be very, very wary. In general, the interest rates are much higher than you would get through any other kinds of financing. Maybe not a credit card, but certainly higher than you would get if you had some kind of home equity line of credit, if that's available to you. And they come with a tax lien, which is payable in often, you know, 20, 30 years. People can end up paying twice as much again in interest and payments over the time. And it's added onto your property tax bill. Read everything carefully. Your financing contract will be separate, but you often will be asked to sign it at the same time. So again, make sure you have everything in writing, and I would avoid signing anything electronically. Because as you'll know, if you've ever used DocuSign, as soon as you signed, it jumps next to the next place where you have to sign. That doesn't allow you time to actually read and ingest, so you really don't want to do that. And then make sure that financing contracts specify what work is being paid for. Make sure it matches what's on your home improvement contract. Make sure it has the contractor's name and it says how that contractor is going to be paid. Okay, I'm nearly done here. Look for something called escalation clauses. These are things that say that your payments will increase after like 12 or 18 months. Unless you make a certain amount of a prepayment. These are quite common, and they can be a nasty sting if you're not expecting them. Make sure you understand the finance charges and the interest rates and how long the loan's going to be for. always get your own quotes for financing. Go to a credit union or the bank if you can to see if you can get additional financing, because while some things are going to be covered by insurance, I'm sure not everything will. And I think a lot of people are going to be entering into these contracts. Finance companies will sometimes, often, should do have welcome and completion calls. Be very careful about how these calls happen. Make sure you don't have the contractor next to you saying yes. You just have to say yes, because that's how I'll get paid. We've had a number of people caught in terrible loans because they have been coached by a contractor. And they tend to ask things like, are you happy with the work done? Well, if they've only done one bit of work and you're happy with that, you might say yes, when actually all they gave you was a bit of drywall instead of the 4 walls, 20 windows, a door, etc., that you contracted for. And again, the rights to cancel, always make sure you're aware of those. And that is it from me. Okay, let's go into questions.
Great. Thank you so much for that overview of the scams ahead of us. So tonight I want to introduce two wonderful members of the Eaton Fire Survivors Network. We have Wendy Davis and Labid Aziz. I did assure Labid that he is not here only for gender diversity, just so he doesn't feel like a token. Labid is a genius and a major leader in our community. Thank you, Wendy and Labid, for joining us to moderate this panel.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here. Labid, if you don't mind, I'll start. I think Steph, we had a question about, I think, kind of mechanics liens, and generally, if you've got a contractor and you pay them, what should you get when you give them a payment? What kind of releases or something? And then specific to maybe subcontractors that your contractor is using, how do you assure yourself that the contractor is paying the sub so that you're not going to get a mechanics lien from the sub?
I think that's why you need the name and you need the contact details, because they're going to be coming to your property, right? And
Right.
so, you need to meet with them. You need to know who they are. I had a swimming pool put in not that long ago, and we knew the person who was doing the concrete, and we would say, have you been paid yet? And he'd say no. And so then we would tie future disbursements to the contractor to them giving us proof, and the subcontractor saying to us, yes, I have been paid. Because it really is, a worry. And I think most people who deal with home improvement contractors don't think that it can be a thing that the subcontractors can come after you when you've already paid.
Right. I've also heard, I've heard of that you write the check not only to the contractor, but to the subcontractor, similar to what the insurance companies do, is they write the check to you and your lender. So you make the check out to both, so that they have to negotiate amongst themselves who gets that money. And that's helpful in making sure that the subcontractor gets paid and you don't get a surprise lien on your house.
I think that can be. I just think like the practicalities of it sometimes can be quite tricky, right? Particularly if there's multiple things being done by multiple subcontractors. And, so, and I see Stacey's got a hand up, but I think, yeah, if you can do it that way, that is a good way to safeguard yourself. Stacey.
Okay.
And I just wanted to also mention that depending on who is insuring your mortgage or owns it, let's say Freddie Mac is the one, they actually have some requirements within their own servicing guide that the home improvement contract contains a provision within it that the contractor, its subcontractors, and its material suppliers will provide written acknowledgement of payment for work performed and materials supplied, as well as all the necessary lien waivers or releases. So depending on who insures your mortgage, or as Lisa was kind of describing the type of mortgage that you have, there may already be a requirement of your mortgage servicer that the home improvement contract contain those provisions to ensure you're protected from any of those potential mechanics liens that will come up. So that's another way to go about it and approach it to make sure it's actually included within the contract terms.
And it might be that it feels like the mortgage servicer is putting you through a lot of hoops, but actually in this respect, those hoops could serve a good purpose in the long run.
As protection for yourself. I know just from my own personal experience, we're starting remediation. My lender or mortgage servicer required a lien waiver from the contractor. So before they'll release any money, there was a lien waiver that the contractor had to sign. So, I guess it's helpful for me as well as for the lender.
I would add that even if your mortgage servicer doesn't require it, or you don't have that category of loan, you can always say in the conversation with the contractor who's trying to avoid getting agreeing to a lien waiver, or to sort of, giving receipts and everything. You say, my understanding is this is the way all the main players in this industry do it. This is the general way, and that's the way that I want it done. You can sort of point to that as the model.
And could one of you just explain sort of the mechanics lien? Because maybe some of the people have never had a home improvement contract before, but obviously are now, and might not be familiar with the whole mechanics lien process and what it does to the title of their house. Maybe Stephanie, can you just explain briefly what a mechanics lien is?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of the mechanics lien is to protect the contractors, right? If they've delivered a whole load of like materials to your house, or they've made improvements to your home and then you don't pay them, they then have something called a mechanics lien, which is attached to your property. And what that means is that you have to pay down that lien. Either if you don't pay it, then it will get paid when you refinance or when you sell the house.
Or could they eventually, depending upon the amount, could they actually foreclose on your house?
It is possible to foreclose on them, but I think it depends. That always depends on how much mortgage you have and how much equity you have in the home, because
And they would have to go through the court to do that. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
But any kind of lien has a priority. So your first mortgage has first priority, a second mortgage, and then a lien would have a priority further down. So they would have to know, will I be able to get my money back if I force the sale of this home? Will it pay off the first and the second and my lien? That's one thing. And then they have to go through the whole court process, which is a costly process. So, often mechanics liens will sit around until they're paid.
Okay. So I don't know, Libby, do you have any questions, or I can ask another question of the panel?
Please go ahead.
Okay. Sort of, I assume that a lot of people, with insurance proceeds, they may either, if their house is burned down, they're probably just going to get a check at some point, and it's going to go to the lender. Can they ask to hold on to the money and not rebuild, or do they have to pay the mortgage as a result of the proceeds if they're not going to rebuild? What kind of works when you get a large payout and you also have a mortgage?
So I'll start, and I'm sure Stacy will have something to add. But as I said in my presentation, I think a lot of the answer to that question is going to depend on a lot of those factors that I mentioned. But I will say, as a kind of one of those factors that's really going to be important in this regard has to do with whether you were current on your payments going into this mess. So if you were just paying on time and you were fine going in, you're going to have a lot more control over that money, in that for certain types of loans, they're required to pay out, up to like $40,000 or some other amount, some percentage of the proceeds, and sort of do this on a regular schedule. And there won't really be, in most cases, a big question regarding, whether this would have to be used to pay like arrears on your mortgage, because you didn't have them, you were current. If you were behind, meaning usually more than 60 days or more than 31 days. So like in a second month of delinquency before the fires happened, there's going to be a lot more restriction on how the money gets released by the servicer. And there is more of a chance that when they sort of do their assessment of how viable it is to rebuild the property with the amount of money available and you know, whether like the security interest they have in your property is somehow going to lose value with all of this. Those are situations where they may end up taking the money and applying it to the mortgage instead. But when you know, if that's in contemplation, that should be something that they are informing you of before it happens. You should have an ability to discuss it with them and push back. I'm going to let Stacy add some nuance here.
Yeah, so going to that question about whether or not you have to pay off your mortgage with those funds. Again, as Lisa described, one of the big questions that your mortgage servicer is going to have in looking at that is whether or not you have a viable repair plan. If you're able to establish that there is a viable repair plan, and they may even have a set schedule of the disbursement of those funds based upon the servicing guide of how much they can give when, they will then work with you to determine if there is that viable repair plan and that those proceeds then can be used for it. However, I think when Wendy first asked the question, she mentioned this idea of you get the check, can you get the money first and not have it go to your mortgage company if you have an outstanding balance on your mortgage? And the answer to that is most likely no. I'm a lawyer. I never answer definitively. Just please get used to that because there's always exceptions to the rules. But I would say one of the best things you can do is, I believe it's in paragraph 5 of the standard deed of trust in California. You will actually see within there that there's a provision that assigns the right to your insurance proceeds to the holder of your note. That's your loan, that's your mortgage, just the terminology that they use, up to the amount of the outstanding loan balance. So when you sign this agreement, you may have already given them the right to these proceeds up to that unpaid principal balance. So it is something that you should expect. That's why that check is sent both to you and the mortgage company, is that they're co-insured on this property. And so they will have a right to those funds if you have an outstanding balance on your mortgage. That being said, you know, I do want to say, I saw earlier in our Q&A, someone asked a question about potentially just paying off their mortgage with their proceeds. And I just want to throw out a caution in making any quick decisions on anything like that. I'm not going to be able to go into the specifics of how I might advise you specifically on how to do that, mainly because it's going to depend on what kind of mortgage you have or the interest rate that you have, as well as what you hope to do next and what your viable plan is for doing that. And as Lisa described earlier in her presentation, if you're able to get a forbearance, it can be for an extended period of time. And there's a reason for that. They understand it can be challenging to pay 2 housing payments at the same time, and that you're also going to need time to actually make an educated, informed decision on what you want to do, including what those repair cost is, or what it is that you would like to do next. If you wanted to go ahead and do a voluntary, you know, giving up of your land and moving on, that you still need time to make those plans and make sure the next loan that you get or the home that you want to purchase is also going to be financially feasible for you. So I just want to throw out the little cautionary tale of, I can't answer that here in the Q&A right now, but I would let you know you have time, and I would encourage you to speak with somebody who can help you look at those financial options and help you navigate what may be the best decision based upon your particular circumstances.
Can I just jump in, because I need to correct what I said before about mechanics liens. Mechanics liens do have to be acted on within 90 days of recording. Other types of liens, that's not the case for. They just sit around there, but they will expire if they're not acted on. So, you know, you have to really move quickly to get rid of those liens. So that they often will just let them expire, but you don't want to take that chance.
So another question is, so for any of us that are either in remediation or we're getting, we and the mortgage servicer are getting those checks, do we need to run our remediation or our home improvement contracts through our mortgage servicer? Or is it, is it something that they have to approve, or can we do it kind of on our own, subject to they're going to sort of dole out the money based on the progress that is, the progress that's made on the actual contract, on the work that's to be performed?
I would advise to always be in close and continued contact with the mortgage servicer through this process, because you wouldn't want to end up in a situation where you sign an agreement that commits you to certain progress payments of certain amounts or at a certain time, and then turn around and find out that the servicer, under whatever rules they're operating under, actually won't disperse as much as you're supposed to pay to the contractor for something, by August or something. So I think before you sign on the dotted line, and certainly if you have signed, hopefully within your cancellation period of 7 days, you talk to the servicer, and it may not be that they have to sign off and authorize, but you really do want to be understanding kind of what the schedule is that they're anticipating. And, depending again on your situation, sometimes servicers get things wrong. So you want to have time to figure that out and correct things there. But you are sort of dealing on two fronts, and you kind of have to coordinate them. And I think there is some risk to just going ahead and then sort of presenting it as a done deal to the servicer.
In my experience, the servicers are very slow. They put your check in the mail and they want it FedEx to them, but they'll put your check in the mail. So you have to
Working with
provide for
servicers takes
delay.
an enormous amount of patience and persistence. I would say
This whole process, all of this takes patience. This takes patience. How about when they hold the money, do they owe interest on that money to us? If the money is ultimately, the insured's, does the servicer, does interest accrue when they have to pay it to us? And what is that rate?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and take this one. I did want to just quickly, though, kind of go back to that question on sharing the contract with your mortgage servicer and getting their approval. Again, Lisa did describe the different types of mortgages, and that there are different ones that are out there, and their servicing guides may actually set forth what's required to be in your contract with your home improvement contractor. So if you want to kind of get around that, maybe back and forth with your mortgage servicer, I just want to strongly recommend you figure out what type of mortgage you have. And if it's backed by Fannie or Freddie, that you have someone advise you on what needs to go in that contract. It'll save you a lot of time rather than working with the contractor, submitting a contract that will then get rejected and having to start again. And so I think this is a good way to try to help you get ready for that and make sure it aligns better for you. So then I wanted to say as well, as to this question of interest and it being required, it is. It's my understanding in California, there's a requirement that any the funds that are held in escrow for rebuilding have to obtain a 2% interest on that escrow account. Now, I will say as well, again, I keep saying this, I'm so sorry, but it depends on what type of mortgage, if you might be able to get more. So each of, let's Fannie and Freddie have different requirements. They do require that it's held in an interest-bearing account and that interest belongs to you as the borrower. But how much that interest rate is can vary. So I believe it's Fannie, but it could be Freddie, to be honest, that requires it to be in an interest-bearing account that has the same level interest rate as a savings account or a money market account. But again, it's an or, it can be a little vague, so it's not always definitive of exactly what that is. FHA and the other GSE do not require any set interest rate amounts. And so again, that's one of those things, is that it can depend on what type of mortgage it is. But I believe in California, it is required that there's at least a 2% interest rate on those escrow accounts where your insurance proceeds are being held.
One other question, the way in which, so I know it depends on kind of who our mortgagor is, ultimately who owns those loans, or if it's federally backed, but does it also matter sort of the loan to value? So, you know, your mortgage is very low compared to the value of your home, or your mortgage is pretty high, say, you know, 70% of the value. Does it matter in that regard, or it's kind of straight across the board? This is how we do it. You might owe $1 on a $2 million house, but we're still gonna do this to you, versus someone who owes 80% of the value of the house.
Well, we're never going to say it's always going to be rational or reasonable, but I would say, and correct me if this is off, Stacy, but I think that kind of question of how much equity you have in the house, basically, right? What's the difference between the value of the loan and the amount you owe? That will have some impact on the servicer's assessment of whether this is a viable like use of the funds to rebuild. And ultimately, what they're looking at on their own behalf, but mostly on behalf of whoever the investor is that stands behind them, is, are we going to be put in a more risky position if X, Y, or Z happens? So they're looking at the numbers in terms of making sure that they're as secure that they're going to get repaid out of the proceeds of that house if you ever can't pay or something, as they were before the event. So it's not that it's like at 50% it's this way and at 40% it's this way. It's more that in the overall assessment of whether they still kind of are going to make the money they expect to make, to, you know, that's the bottom line. That's going to be a factor, basically.
B, do you have anything, or how have we sort of gone through the whole mortgage kind of thing and maybe on to scams? Because we have just a few minutes left.
There was a forbearance question that somebody had actually sent earlier, and I know we're sort of.
Okay.
So, and Lisa, I guess, you know, you're on the forbearance side of things. So what are the cons of forbearance? I've heard, and neighbors have heard, sort of, you know, obviously you might have to refinance the home, or it changes the interest rate, or I've also heard some folks have heard that it takes a hit on your credit score, something like that. So what are the negatives or the cons on the forbearance side of things?
So in most of these situations, and this is also covered by the commitments that were made to the governor, which I've asked to see in writing. I think these were just phone calls, so I'm a little less comfortable saying like you're totally protected, but there shouldn't be negative credit reporting when you're in a forbearance related to a disaster that you know you got because you were in a, you know, disaster impacted situation. So forbearance shouldn't, you know, be a hit to the credit, but there will be some kinds of loans and some servicers who will report it, and they may do so wrongfully, and then you have to get into getting that corrected, but they may be able to do it. So there can be cases where there's some issue there. If you've always been on time and you have, you know, your pristine credit score, it can, even if like sometimes they'll report not that you're delinquent, but that you're in some sort of accommodation. And even that can affect your credit. So that is a concern. But what I would say is my biggest sort of hesitation about people just taking a forbearance because it's available is that, especially if it's going to go on for a long time, as I said, there's going to be you know, the end of the road where you have to then deal with that arrears that has built up. And the more months that go by without paying, the bigger that number gets. And if you can go back to paying what you did before, and they're going to offer, you have the kind of loan where they're going to just offer to put it at the end of the loan, okay, that could, you could sort of go back to the status quo. But if you, particularly if you have an FHA loan, and I think there are many of those in the Eaton Fire zone, the problem, and it's a little complicated, but the problem is that if you need to get your loan kind of modified to be able to bring it current, you're going to end up, as I said, like facing a higher interest rate to get that modification just because of the way the contracts work. So you could be, you know, with a 4% rate going into this and then end up with a 6.5% or more rate, which is not going to be great for you. So my real advice about forbearances is they're there to be used if you really need them, but I would not take it lightly. I would really try, if it's possible, to cover the payment or to use it only for as briefly as possible.
Thank you. Very helpful.
And do you all know anything about SBA loans and sort of how the money can be used, or what kind of restrictions are on them? No? Okay. What about what are the sort of current scams? I know you talked about them kind of in general. These are the things you should watch out for, but are there, you know, like I worked at Edison, and so there were all sorts of scams about, you know, we're going to turn your power off if you don't pay us in gift cards. And so are there any kind of current scams that you guys are aware of that some of our audience might run across?
I mean, I think what we've heard of, we've heard of things that I don't know that you would be seeing right now, but like people impersonating FEMA officers, people in you know, those kind of impersonation things happened a lot at the beginning. I think everyone's being deluged by attorney offers at the moment, which I've just put straight in the trash. But I think that there are, I mean, you know, there are already definitely some like bad actor remediation company that we've been hearing about, that, you know, where people have basically created more mess than there was originally, or remediated a part and then, you know, took all the insulation out, which then made everything filthy again. So we're hearing a lot of kind of remediation firms who are doing very, very poor jobs. I think the thing that I would do is I really just wouldn't trust anybody that comes to you. That, I mean, maybe it's just because I've been doing this for too long and I'm very jaded, but I really would not trust people who come to you. You should be going out and finding them, which I know is a daunting thing, because I think everyone, you know, who's affected by the fire just has so much stuff to do all the time. And I know that it's maybe a little bit less now than it was nearer to when the fires happened, but it's still exhausting, all the things that you have to do. But always check contractor licenses. That is a really key thing. And, you know, if something bad does happen, please file complaints with the Contractor State Licensing Board, because the only way to kind of stop other people being scammed is if they know about it and report it to, you know, the DA or the police. Particularly, you know, in groups like yours, you're all talking, and so you will hear like who are the problematic people. I'm sure you've already heard of like, don't use that person, they've done this, right? I mean, that's the best situation you can be in, right? Because you are a group and you've got some kind of power there. But I think, yeah, just avoid people who are trying to solicit you. And we heard, you know, I heard of people at like World Central Kitchen who, you know, were like getting food from the World Central Kitchen kind of trucks and going up to people in the days straight after the fire saying, I've got some food for you, and then trying to talk to them about lawsuits. I mean, it's just really disgusting.
Oh, God.
You know, I think we've all heard stories like that. And
I would
Um,
also, yeah, I'm just going to add one thing, which is that we're in a very weird moment with respect to like green home improvements. But, you know, going into the current moment we're in, there was actually a lot of money or promised money washing around for tax credits or rebates or things to do certain kinds of work that may be part of a rebuilding or a repair project and may really be a great thing to do. But I would be really careful. This goes back to some of those red flags Steph was talking about, claims that are made that these are either free or that you're getting, you're going to get it all back in your taxes or you're going to get some special rebate. A lot of that is currently in a really big limbo, and there's a lot of uncertainty about those dollars and whether they're going to actually get where they were intended to be under the last, presidential administration. So it's just another area to be really careful, because we have seen, as Steph said, a lot of fraud related to those kind of things. And it's this feel good thing. We're going to put solar on, we're going to, give you these best windows, we're going to give you this great paint that, reflects the light away, whatever it may be. You just want to be sort of extra careful with those and with the claims that are made about how you can pay for it.
and like scammers are, they're clever people, right? They're awful, but they tend to have some, so they will, you will have heard that there might be some free program to do with something, and then they'll latch onto that and they'll say, you'll have heard all about this in the news, and you feel, oh yeah, I did hear something about that. So, and the amount of people that we have seen, including, so some of us are part of a lobbying coalition for low income consumers, including our lobbyist. Like, she got scammed. Like, there's so many people who get scammed, and who, there's a huge sense of shame about it, because, it's not that people are unintelligent. It's just that, scammers are very convincing, and, people fall prey to them. And at the moment, people are, for a lot of people, some people are feeling okay, but a lot of people are feeling very vulnerable, very raw, and they want a bit of hope. And if somebody says, well, we can get you this great thing and it's going to be free, maybe people just want to believe that. And if anything ever sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true.
It is too good to be true. Exactly. Let me
All right.
see.
Well, thank you so much,
Yeah,
Lisa.
thank you all.
Is there, like, maybe for the two of you guys, is there, or Stacy, for anyone of you here, is there any like one last word that you would love for us to know, um, as we proceed with recovering in our own way? Should we just maybe go around and just say, if, like, if there's just like one last piece of advice that you would love to leave with us?
I'm going to sort of a little bit change what our Senator Elizabeth Warren said. Persist. Persist. It's hard, it's daunting, it's exhausting, it requires patience, but um, you can get on the other side of it, and you can get hopefully what you need and want, to be able to do at this moment by persisting and not giving up. So
Thank you, Lisa. Who wants to go next? Stephanie?
I would just say, just slow down. I know people are desperate to get things moving, but slow down. And Joy, I just sent to you a YouTube link to a channel. Like, we did a whole series of webinars on various different issues, including property tax, that people might be interested in. So if you can circulate that at some point, that would be great. And then Stacey, and then we can have Jumana and Lily, who have not been able to speak, but who are wonderful advocates, so they can also chime in with their words of wisdom.
That would be great.
And I think
Stacey?
what I would say is, please know you're not alone. I mean, we're here to answer those questions. We want to help. Your neighbors want to help and work together. And so just know you're not alone in this, and that there is support there. both within your group here that's already doing this amazing thing and bringing people here to answer your questions. But there are resource providers like NHLP and Public Counsel who do want to be there to help you, because this isn't easy, as Lisa said, and persisting. And so please know you're not alone.
Thank you for that. And Steph, I did get that link. Thank you. I will put that in the Discord. Jumana.
Sure. I guess I'm going to borrow a little bit from what everyone else has said. I think it is it's very difficult to get a hold of servicers to kind of understand what information they're sharing with you. Be persistent, and ask for help. We're here to help you.
Okay, thank you. And Lily.
I don't know if I have any other words of wisdom other than what has already been helped. Just don't be afraid to ask for help. Take your time. If you're given a contract you can't read, you can always come to a legal services organization and ask for help with that, or ask your neighbor or your friend, a family member, if they can read the contract for you and explain it to you. Don't trust the person giving you the contract to explain it to you. Ask someone else, and just, don't be afraid to ask for help.
And I have two more. Yeah, read your contracts. Nobody wants to read them, but read them because they are informative. And document everything. Every time you talk to a mortgage servicer, have who you spoke to, make sure you find out their name or their number. Sometimes they won't give you a name. But make sure you have all that, because that can be really, really, really important if it does ever come to kind of litigation or getting lawyers involved, to be able to have that audit trail.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time to be with us tonight and sharing so much rich information that we all need to know. Thank you so much to Labid and to Wendy for leading our discussion tonight. Next Thursday, we'll be meeting with a soils expert from Stanford University, whose name I forget right now, the professor of soils, who has been spending a lot of time in Altadena collecting soil samples. And he'll be on to talk to us about the big question about what's really considered safe and the science behind that. So join us next Thursday from 8 to 9 p.m. And to everyone in our audience, thank you for joining us tonight. We will be posting this video on our YouTube channel and our Discord for everyone to enjoy in the future. Thank you all, and to all, good night.
Good night.